Hello there, and welcome along to Season 2 and Episode 15 of the Garden the Ben podcast. The wait is finally over and the Chelsea Flower Show has now opened its doors. I'm off to the press event at Chelsea where I'm going to be able to share with you some really exciting news and some wonderful new plant launches that we're going to be seeing appearing not only on our screens but also in our gardens and garden centres and online stores over the next couple of weeks, months and years, setting the trends for the way the gardening world is heading over the next few years. With many new rose varieties being launched by all three of the major rose breeders here in the UK, and many different rare and unusual plants being launched by many different people, I'm going to be very interested to see which varieties perform and get awarded RHS medals this year. So you're going to be seeing lots of information from me first. So make sure that you keep a breadth of everything across all of my social media channels on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok and Threads, where I use the username @_gardenerben. At home in my garden, I'm starting to feel a little bit of blind panic, as I'm assuming most of you will be as well. The season is well advanced, everything is growing really quickly. However, we are in desperate need of rain and not many people are talking about it just yet. But we've been now 7 to 8 weeks without any substantial rain here in the UK whatsoever. Now, for many of you listening along in different climates, that might not sound a lot, but here in our English coastal garden, that's a very long time for us to go without substantial rainfall. Things are getting very dry indeed. The water butts are empty. The lawn is already browning and going dry and crisp. And many herbaceous perennials are going to be short and stumped this year if they don't get some substantial water quickly. If you, like me, harvest an awful lot of rainwater, now is the time to use it instead of reaching for your hose. Make sure that your water butts and tanks are emptied first, just in case rain arrives so you can harvest some more, and always reach for the hose pipe as a last resort. Also, a little ahead of schedule, I'm starting to bed out my tender and frost tender plants. Now, it's been very warm for several weeks here in the UK, with nighttime temperatures still hovering between 5 and 10 degrees. I think we're now clear of all risks of frost. So this year's new dahlia varieties and the tender plants such as the bananas and succulents are making their way back out into the major part of the garden, where they'll spend the summer months. Please pay close attention to your last frost date, as it's not unusual for us to have a little nip in the air all the way through to the very end of May. So proceed with caution if you haven't already hardened plants off properly. In a little change of direction, this week I have the pleasure in bringing you a conversation with a very exciting and informative guest. And I want to extend my personal thanks to Dr. Jose Costa for being so generous with his time when I spoke to him just a few weeks ago. Today, Dr. Jose Costa and I are going to talk to you about allergies, airborne allergies, and more importantly, about hay fever. And in this conversation, I have to admit that there are several mic drop moments for me. Mark, my husband, suffers terribly with asthma and with allergies and has done all of his life, causing him to have really bad symptoms. Everything from runny noses to dry, itchy eyes, sneezing fits, and lack of sleep during the summer months. This is also doubled up during the autumn and winter months when we tend to move the furniture about in the house, causing him to go into anaphylactic shock several times when we do this. There are several mic drop moments in my conversation with Dr. Jose Costa, which I am astonished to find out. And we've gained more information from our conversation about the subject than we have in nearly 4 decades, with Mark going backwards and forwards to his GP, complaining about symptoms and trying to make himself feel not better, but just comfortable enough to go about his day-to-day existence during the summer months. So without any further delays, let's get Dr. Jose Costa onto the podcast now and get the discussion started. Well, on today's episode of the Gardener Ben podcast, we're changing direction ever so slightly, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jose Costa. Jose, welcome along to the Gardener Ben podcast. Thank you
Thank you so
so
much.
much. No, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. We're going to be talking about allergies, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're going to talk about airborne allergies. Normally, people call it hay fever.
Okay, and of course, this is something that affects, I mean, it affects the entire population worldwide, but obviously, we're talking to a very specific market of gardeners here today, and obviously some
Mm.
farmers and other people that take me with them when they go out on their day-to-day basis. So tell me a little bit about the field and the way that you are approaching the subject of allergies and hay fever.
Well, as you mentioned, I have plenty of my patients that are either gardeners, very keen gardeners, or they are the parents of my patients, or actually farmers. I have plenty of farmers, and most of them they suffer so much from hay fever, being it grass pollen, tree pollen, or weed pollens, and I find sometimes so tricky for them, to go about the things that they love or their work and how much they suffer. So I try to help them as much as I can.
Okay, I mean, it's something that I mean, I don't know if this is true. If you forgive me during today's chat, if you hear me scribbling away in the background, because this
Ah, no
subject is
worries.
something that really, really interests me. I'm going to take lots of notes as we speak to you today. As a child,
Absolutely.
I mean, as a child, I suffered terribly with hay fever. I really, really
Yeah.
did. I mean, everything from runny noses to sneezes, and itchy eyes. I mean, I had it all. I used to get hives if I used to go out in the grass as well.
Hmm.
I seem to almost grow out of it. Now, is that something that can happen, or have I just got used to feeling a certain way and not be so troubled or bothered by the symptoms that I used to experience as a child?
Well, I think that it can go both ways, really, because I've seen some people that as time goes by, it seems that their symptoms have become better. But also, as you mentioned, some people just get used to it, just move on. And, once in a while they take an antihistamine here or there, or they go and wash their eyes, and they carry on. But I think that really, really, if you're going to see, most of them, as soon as they start taking some proper medication, to control their symptoms, they suddenly see a significant difference and they don't even realize how bad it was.
hmm I mean, I also had terrible eczema as a child,
Mm.
and again, I was always told by a doctor whether this is true or not, because I know things changed very greatly over a period of time. We're talking about sort of
Yeah.
25 to 30 years ago now, but I had terrible eczema, and I did grow out of that. So I just wonder whether I sort of managed to ignore the symptoms and march on regardless, because my husband, Mark, suffers terribly with absolutely. I mean, he's allergic to our entire house, and I'm not gonna. And he is. I mean,
Oh,
his
poor
symptoms are.
guy.
We have a thatched cottage, which is
Yeah.
obviously is built of straw, full of
Uh-huh.
dust, which he's allergic to. He's allergic to chickens or birds and feathers. He's
Yes.
allergic to house mites and dust and pollen. We have a Labradoodle who he's fine with because she's hypoallergenic. And
Oh, can I
and
correct you on something there?
of course, please do. Yes.
There's no such thing as hypoallergenic animals.
Wow. Okay.
It is a gimmick to sell animals for a more expensive price.
Well, in which case I've fallen into that pitfall. I mean, I don't get me wrong, we wouldn't change our lovely Ethel. She's a Labradoodle for the world, but he
Yes.
seems to be quite copable with her until if she gets overly excited and, for instance, licks her, which we don't encourage as behaviour anyway, and
Yes.
the saliva tends to bring him out in hives then. But normally
Absolutely.
he's and is that quite common for a lot of people?
It is, but you mentioned something very interesting. And now, if we're talking about which is another component of what I do, which is allergy to animals, because those are airborne allergies as well. Most people don't realize that, for instance, when it comes to dogs, a male dog produces 8 times more allergen than a female dog. And that is probably why your husband is so well dog and not a male dog. But also, interestingly, people can be allergic solely to male dogs because there's a protein that a male dog produces that the female dog does not. So there's a lot of variations there. So of course, leaking, and because the main thing is on animal saliva, that will lead to problems, especially with the hives, as you mentioned.
Goodness me, I'm absolutely astonished. I can safely say that I was today years old when I found out that information, and I'm absolutely positive that Mark won't know that either. That a male dog is almost 80% more alert, will cause allergic reaction more than a female dog.
Oh,
That's
yes.
utterly astonishing. So again, if we don't learn anything else on during today's conversation, I'm thank you for that. I'm absolutely astonished. So you mentioned a little earlier that about what I mentioned about the symptoms that, for instance, I used to have a child. Now these
Yes.
vary from person to person greatly, and they can be utterly just disturb someone's day-to-day life, can't they? When we're not just talking just a little sniff or a sneeze here, we're talking proper full-blown allergy reactions, and the airways can close up and you can have hives and all that kind of thing. Why do the symptoms vary so much between patients?
It has to do with their sensitivity to the allergen itself. So, an allergic reaction, and including these airborne allergies, depends in so many factors. The most obvious one is what you call dose and concentration. So, the higher the dose, the higher the concentration, the worse the allergic reaction it
Yes,
is.
yeah.
But you can have someone that is more sensitive to that allergen than others. So there's a massive variability that you can have. But there's so many things that also will affect that. So we have what is called a threshold at which you're going to react, and you can bring that threshold down. And the things that can bring that threshold down is simple things as doing exercise, not sleeping very well, drinking alcohol. So those will bring the threshold down. So suddenly you can have a worse reaction on a similar situation that you had before, and you don't understand why. And then it is because of all these what is called cofactors.
So as a general rule, much as your GP would suggest, good all-round health and sort of looking after yourself and maintenance of exercise and keeping yourself well, sleeping well and hydrating well, that all of those things are going to help you combat when it comes to allergy season and actually sort of weather the onslaught of what Mother Nature's going to throw at you.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said, especially for all the gardeners around, I feel so sorry for them, especially around this time of year that they like to be there, replanting their pots and all that, and then suddenly they are exposed to all the grass pollen and all the tree pollen, and they will feel miserable.
And again, for some people, as you've mentioned there, it is some people suffer in different ways, don't they? A lot of people don't know. This is
Yes.
where I can feed in a little bit more of the horticultural background. That actually a lot it's called hay fever, but obviously it doesn't really come from hay. It's actually
Hmm.
pollen that we're talking about, and the largest dispense of pollen actually comes from pine trees. And it's quite
Hmm.
early on in the season, isn't it? It's an airborne pollen that billions and billions of tons are released for pollination of seeds by pine trees early on in the season, normally late March, beginning of April, and that's normally the start of the season. And a lot of people have a strong
Oh,
reaction to tree pollen, and then they won't
yes.
be won't be particularly bad with, for instance, pollen that's produced by flowers.
Yes, absolutely. But you talk about pine trees. In the country, actually, the main thing that people suffer most is birch trees. But if you move to mainland Europe, it varies according to where you are. But in England, the main tree causing most of the problems actually is birch.
Okay, which is obviously one of our indigenous species here, and across
Yeah.
obviously the northern parts of Europe as well. That's
Mm.
again. I'm looking out my window at the end of the lounge now at the six birch trees that I planted there, which I'm assuming won't be helping Mark at all either, because I forgot to say that he also is, bless him, he's also asthmatic. So and again, these things
Oh.
sometimes go hand in hand, don't they?
Absolutely, because a lot of people will develop something called allergic asthma. And even yesterday, I was warning people around because there were clouds in the sky, and I thought there was going to be thunderstorms.
Yes, I
And
saw. Yeah.
there's one thing called thunderstorm asthma, which makes the symptoms even worse because the charged particles go into the air, but also if it starts raining, water does something very incredible. The drops from clouds, as they hit pollen, they will subdivide the pollen, making it smaller, which means that they will go even further deep into the airways, causing those problems breathing that you mentioned before. So people need to really be careful with that.
Okay, well that's the second time in this very brief conversation that I've been this many days old that I've noticed that. I always thought that when we had a rainstorm, I was aware that the pollen count soared, and I thought that was because the dry air and the pollen had settled onto places, and then the rain came down and sort of kicked it back up as dust. But I didn't know it actually magnified and actually broke it apart and actually caused it to go deeper into the respiratory system. So once again, I'm astonished I've learned that today as well.
Is that what you mentioned is also true, but we need to also take into account all this. But it's something that you talked about, the planting of the trees. So I'll give you another bit of information that most people don't know, and it is something that has a very interesting name called botanical sexism.
Ah, okay.
So so and this has to do with a lot of people suffering more in big towns than what they used to because they thought it was mainly pollution and not pollen. Now, male pollen trees, and a lot of people don't know, you have male pollen trees and you have female pollen trees. So the male trees will produce far, far more pollen than female trees.
Hmm.
Now, when you go to big cities, the landscape artists tend to prefer the male trees because the male trees will cause less problems, will cause less dirt in the floor. So they'll prefer to plant those ones. So in reality, you're going to go to some towns in which the pollen count is extremely high with less trees, and people wonder why they're having symptoms. And that is because of botanical sexism. So the trees that are being planted are male ones, and they'll produce more pollen than the female trees as well.
So again, we've got three mic drops in a row. Look at that. That's astonishing. So once again, we're talking about landscape architects, basically choosing varieties of tree that are going to need less cleaning up and be much more clean and tidy, and
Mhm.
probably planted for the reasons of clearing up pollen and clean air and making ourselves still feel nice about the environment and
Absolutely,
breathing
yes.
oxygen. But actually, the varieties that are chosen are actually making the situation within towns and cities even worse.
Yeah, it potentially can. And then there's quite a lot of examples of that, and London is one of the studied places about it. It's interesting.
Uh-huh. And is there a particular type of tree that's planted a lot in London that's causing a problem? I know that's probably a very specific question. You might not know the answer to that one.
Oh, I won't know the answer for that one. We would need to ask the landscape artists there.
Well, funny enough, actually, I'll go back and ask him the question because I actually spoke to a gentleman called Matt Pottage the other day. Or
Yes.
sorry, Matt Pottage. I need to get that right. And he is
Hmm.
actually he actually works for the Royal Parks. He's the coordinator of landscape strategy for the Royal Park. So
Yes.
I'll put that question to him. Now, a second ago, you mentioned about the correct taking of medications to ease
Yes.
people's symptoms, specifically with sort of allergies and hay fever. Now,
Uh-huh.
is there a particular type of medication that you would suggest that people take?
Yes, definitely. Normally people, their rescue medication is always antihistamines.
Hmm.
For me, as a doctor, antihistamines is the fourth choice, never the first one.
Okay.
So if you have symptoms in your nose, if you have symptoms in your eyes, you need to have a medication that is going to treat the symptoms directly. So there are nasal sprays, especially there are a couple of nasal sprays that you only use once a day, and there are eye drops that will sort out your problems. And then you have a second nasal spray, which is an antihistamine nasal spray that can use as a rescue medication. So those would be the main things to go to. And but the problem is the ones that I'm talking about are not the ones that are being bought over the counter. You need a prescription for those.
Okay.
So start with that one. And then afterwards, of course, if your symptoms are still not under control, of course, take antihistamines on top of that. But then we are reaching that a threshold, or already past a threshold in which you probably need a completely different type of medication. And for instance, we talked about your husband and potentially allergic asthma. We're talking about something else called sublingual immunotherapy. And that is a wonderful treatment that will remove most of your symptoms, if not all of them, completely. And you don't need to take medication again whatsoever.
Okay. And would you like to talk us a little bit through how that treatment would work?
Oh, it's a brilliant thing. So, basically, imagine we're talking about birch. So imagine that you are allergic to birch pollen.
Hmm.
So the medication will contain birch pollen. but it will be in such a quantity that will not cause symptoms on you, but your immune system is going to recognize it and is going to start tolerating it. So this treatment, especially the one that I use, which is called sublingual, which is basically means under the tongue, is a spray. You spray it under your tongue. It's two sprays under your tongue once a day, and the treatment goes for 3 years. Normally, after 6 to 9 months, you see already a radical change in your symptoms. And then the reason why we do it for 3 years is that afterwards, when you finish the treatment, it will last for many, many decades without you needing to take the antihistamines, the nasal sprays, and so on that you've been taking so far.
Okay, so it's obviously what I think what you're saying in a nutshell is it's really important to understand before you embark on any treatment what your actual allergy is caused by, and actually
Absolutely.
identify what the cause is. And then am I correct in thinking that this treatment is working almost on the same basis as those doing holistic therapies when they for instance take small quantities of locally sourced honey? Is
Ah,
there any basis to that sort of
oh,
technique?
very interesting question. Actually, there is. So, because when you take locally sourced honey, of course, the bees will bring the pollen that is around from the common trees or plants that are around.
And for
So
instance,
normally, if you
for instance, here on in it, because I'm on the outskirts of the
yes,
New Forest, it's heather, and the
uh-huh,
honey will actually turn because it's heather honey. It flowers pink in mass. There's hundreds of acres of
ah,
it, so the
yes.
honey will actually turn an almost sort of pinky brown color.
Oh,
So
nice.
we've always managed to get sort of Mark some locally sourced honey, and it he seems to think it helps, but I'm asking whether there's actually any sort of evidence that it does.
It does. So in reality, what you're doing is a very minute version of sublingual immunotherapy
Hmm.
because the honey will contain the pollen that you are allergic to. So basically, and if you take it to a spoon a day, for instance, it will give you some sort of immunotherapy. No doubt about that. The
Yeah.
problem is that the dose that it is in that honey is not the enough for your immune system to get the right response to it, but also because as soon as the pollen season ends, you stop taking the honey.
Of course, yes,
So,
yeah.
but there is a scientific background, definitely there is.
Yeah, okay. And is there a specific way? I mean, I'll get it because we're talking about the medications. Is there a proper
Yes.
way that someone should take their medications? Because again, Mark's going to get be he's going to be very angry with me when he listens back to this because I always get very shirty with him because he doesn't use his inhalers a huge amount now. But when he does take them, I'm always very funny with the way he takes them because he rushes. I
Hmm.
think as many people do, they get used to doing something and he's not particularly mindful sometimes with the way that he takes it. And I said, well, that wasn't very
Yes.
good. You're supposed to, take your time with your breath and hold it and do it mindfully. And is there a way that these medications should be taken? How long before someone, for instance, goes out and tries to do some work in the garden, should they take their medications before they go out into the garden?
So you are absolutely right about technique. If you don't have a correct technique even for nasal spray or for an inhaler, then the medication is not going to reach the place that it should reach. So as you're saying, taking a deep breath when you inhale the medication, especially an inhaler, is very, very important, and holding it for a while for the medication to settle, because otherwise, if you breathe out straight away, a lot of the medication is going to come out as well.
Hmm.
And the same with the nasal sprays, there's a correct technique for that. Now, taking the medication in advance, it depends if you're already suffering or not. So one thing is the daily medication to prevent you from having any symptoms, so the preventative medication, and the other one is rescue medication. Rescue medication like blue inhalers, like the antihistamines. If you're already having symptoms, by all means, take it before you go outside, because otherwise you're going to symptoms are just going to become worse. Otherwise, take it with you, and when you go outside, and as soon as you start to feel any symptoms, take it straight away, because rescue medication will work almost instantly.
Okay, and what sort of time span is you saying instantly? Are we talking 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour?
Oh, in case of the blue inhaler, it will work
Yes.
within seconds.
Okay, yeah.
In the case of an antihistamine, it will take about half an hour to start working.
Mhm. Okay, but I suppose that very much depends on your digestive system and how quickly or what's in your stomach at the time that you take it as well, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. But normally, what is called a second generation or non-sedating antihistamines, things like cetirizine, loratadine, independently of how much you have in your stomach, it will take roughly 40 minutes to start working.
Of course.
Of course, some people will take slightly more, but some people will take slightly less. But in average, around 30 minutes it will work.
Okay, and again, it's interesting you brought up the two main sort of strands to my understanding of antihistamine tablets,
Yeah.
and the two perform incredibly differently as well, don't they? Because again, I know because it's something that rules our household with rescue medications, especially
Uh-huh.
Mark can take the one that begins with L, but can't take the one that
Yes.
begins with C because it makes him really drowsy.
Ah, okay. Then it is very specific to him. That the reason why that works is very complex. It has to do with something called histamine receptors, and because there's a massive variety of histamine receptors. There has been studied around 400 histamine receptors, and because there's so many variability, there might be someone that works better with one than with the other,
Hmm.
and they might be drowsy with the one and not the other, and that is impossible for us to do a test to find out that until the person takes the medication itself, and then we'll see which one works or not. And that is mainly the variation between antihistamines is the way that they connect to those receptors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm astonished. I'm so glad we've had this conversation today. I'm absolutely astonished by several of these things, and I need to ask you, possibly off the call when we finished, if I can get Mark in to see you because
Yeah.
we've been struggling. I'm not no disrespect whatsoever to our local doctor's surgery whatsoever, but we've been struggling to get him any real help from our local GP for some time, and I keep sending him back for more advice and saying that your symptoms are terrible at this time of year, and
Oh,
he can bet sometimes he struggles to sleep. He'll get dark circles around his eyes, obviously because
oh, absolutely.
he's laboring to get oxygen into his system, especially when he's sleeping. Um, and I heard, for instance, I don't know if this is true, but I heard several DJs, for instance, on the radio would have like injections from leading specialists. Is that something that exists, or is that a
So,
myth?
if the injections is what I think they are dangerous.
Okay.
So there are people still giving those injections, which is steroid injections.
Hmm.
They are dangerous.
Well, good
The
job I didn't
potential
make him have
side
one of those, isn't it?
No, the potential side effects are quite significant, and that so the British Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology and even the NHS has already told practices to stop using that because of the significant side effects.
Okay.
So if someone is doing it, they actually doing it against what is the current guidance.
Okay.
So the main thing is that for the ones that suffer the most, sublingual immunotherapy definitely is the best thing. And if I can give you an example of how beautifully well it works, I have a case of this young police officer, and she came to me because a while ago she was running through fields to, catch a couple of criminals,
Hmm.
and she suffered so much that her eyes swelled up that she could not see, and she started struggling to breathe, so she needed help from her colleagues. So she came to me to have sublingual immunotherapy. And I started her on sublingual immunotherapy at the time that she was about to be dismissed from the force. And 9 months later, she's now back on front line doing everything that she wanted to do because she's no longer suffering. So now she can go, and because she also likes gardening, she can do her gardening, she can do her job as a police officer without any problems because of sublingual immunotherapy has changed. She sleeps well because a problem that you're saying, the sleeping, it affects so much people. For teenagers studying exams, how much does that affect them? Incredible.
Of course, we all know that if we don't regularly get enough sleep, that our bodies can't heal, our bodies can't process and repair
Yes.
themselves. So again, I see Mark suffer terribly. I say, and it's not it's not just at this time of year, but again, there will be different stages in what we do in our sort of annual lives. For instance, on the run up to the
Mm,
festive period when we move all the furniture in the house and bring in the Christmas tree, that's another period of time that
Yes,
really, really affects him. And I'm always very disciplined that when we sort of, I know when we move the furniture, that I'm the one that moves the furniture, and I try and do the hoovering up, and I try and keep him wherever possible. I mean, everybody's houses have got these little dust traps underneath them, but we tend to move absolutely
absolutely.
everything, and then we have another episode just after Christmas because we put everything back together again. And yeah, so yeah, by the sounds of things, I very much need to pop him in the car and bring him to one of your clinics, because you've got two
But
clinics, correct? Is that correct? You've got one in Warwickshire and one in Oxfordshire.
yes, I have actually three clinics currently.
Okay.
So one Leamington Spa, the other one is Banbury, and one of them is in Aylesbury. And I'm about to open one in London because so many people have asked me to go and do clinics in London.
But
So one of these days, if I can, I will go.
well, by the sounds of things, you're going to be a very, very busy man. And I wanted
Mm,
just to quickly touch base with you as well. I mean, there's
yes,
people in that. There's lots of old wives' tales surrounding the
yes.
of what you can do to help yourself. Is there any benefit of sort of, for instance, rubbing Vaseline on your between your top lip and your nose, or surrounding your nostrils with Vaseline? Is that any use in doing that?
Yeah, so those are things to mitigate the problem. So, because if you put, and some people will rub Vaseline around the nostril itself, and mainly the reason for that is as you're breathing in, the Vaseline will just catch quite a lot of the pollen that is about to go inside your nostrils. So
Hmm.
basically, you're just decreasing the amount that is you're going to be exposed to. For that point of view, you can also think about using shades that cover your eyes completely when you go outside to prevent the pollen from getting in contact with your eyes. So
Hmm.
that is a kind of a mild preventative measure, which does have some effect. But for the ones that suffer a lot, probably it's not going to help much.
No, and what are the other things that you also offer treatments for? Because obviously we talked a lot about hay fever because we're talking about
Mm.
gardeners and farmers, but what other sort of treatments are you offering to your patients as well?
Oh, I see allergy patients, being them young, being them also food allergies. I see plenty. And as you might imagine, currently there's a massive spike in food allergies.
Indeed, yeah.
But interestingly, there's also a link between hay fever and food allergies, because there's something, and again coming back to birch pollen allergy. Birch pollen allergy can lead to something called the pollen food syndrome, in which people, if they eat certain types of vegetables or fruits, especially raw, they will have like this tingling, annoying sensation in their mouth. And if they cook those fruits and vegetables, the sensation goes away, and that is called the pollen food syndrome. So I see plenty of my patients for that as well. So
Mhm.
the main thing, my area is allergies in general, but the ones that I like the most really is airborne allergies, so mainly the hay fevers I talked about, but also animal allergies. I see a lot of patients with that.
Okay, of course. So you touched briefly there on food allergies, which for a lot of people are a terrifying subject as well.
Oh,
Obviously,
yes.
large incidences recently of people being in planes and confined spaces that have had very, very allergic and often fatal reactions to food. Now, again,
Yes.
I think Mark should be the person talking to you here, not me, because Mark's background is actually in childcare. And
Ah,
one
yes.
one one of one of the large problems I believe facing of us, and why we're having so many allergic reactions, is nurseries are unable now, because of the so severe reactions and the consequences of those reactions, that a lot of
Mm,
foodstuffs are actually banned from nurseries, and children
yes.
at a young age aren't exposed to small quantities of all sorts of things, everything from nutmeg to peanuts, that we used to be very naturally introduced to at a young age. And is
Yes.
that something that you're seeing much more of as well?
It is, but a lot of it has been a bit of um, wrong information that parents have been given about not give allergens at a certain age, only later in life, and when in reality we know by research that we have done that we should introduce all those allergens when they are very small. Of course, as you mentioned, nurseries. You're going to go most of the nurseries now in schools. They are going to be free from peanuts and they're going to be free from tree nuts
Hmm.
because is the thing that people I'm more worried about. But considering that probably the most problematic and the biggest incidence of allergies in food wise is milk, is cow's milk, and most of the places, most of the educational places or establishments are not going to restrict the use of cow's milk there. So it is tricky to navigate that. It is, and often I've been in meetings with schools and parents to see how can we work together on this, and sometimes can be quite troublesome. But I think that as hopefully intelligent human beings, we can always reach a compromise and get a way that is useful for everyone to work together, and that's what I try to do.
It's again, it's a subject that actually came up on an episode several weeks ago with a lady up in Scotland I was talking to about, and her and her family are vegan. And again, I was talking to her. I actually come from a dairy farming family, and
Hmm.
yeah, I now personally stay away from milk because I know that it just upsets my stomach terribly. And for decades, I drank my way through it, and
Yes,
oh no, it's good for me. It contains lots of healthy fats and proteins and vitamin D that I need for myself. But again, until you kind
yes.
of look at the symptoms and think to yourself, actually, if I stopped eating, for instance, unleavened bread, I no longer eat. I don't eat bread with yeast in it, and I no
Yes.
longer really take a great deal. I have milk in tea, but that's obviously very small quantities. It's not really enough to upset
Hmm.
me. And if I stay away from the ice cream and if I stay away from the cream, actually, my digestive health is much better. And I think a lot of people they are starting to pay a little more attention to how things make them feel and are more aware and I think that's a really nice part of our culture as we move forward now. It's just to basically listen to your body and actually not do what I did for decades and sort of eat and drink your way through things thinking, oh, it's all fine, it's fine, and actually no, it's not. It makes you terribly ill.
Yeah, totally. But people need to understand their bodies. And finally, we are starting to understand that healthy food is healthy food, and ultra processed food can cause significant problems. And I hope that we are managing to sway people around to start, picking up their food and fresh and cook it because it's the best way. And, considering for me, I'm a bit biased on that because I'm Portuguese by origin. And for me, Mediterranean diet is the best. And they keep on saying that Mediterranean diet is the best, and I have no doubts about that. And it is all because we pick up fresh fruits and vegetables and fish and meat, and we do it on the spot. And that actually, it has been known that if we do that in children, the fresh fruits and vegetables since they are very young, is also preventative for them to developing not only food allergies but also the airborne allergies. So healthy gut means a healthy body. There's no doubt about that.
That's a really interesting point. I saw something on social media. It's been going around for several months now about the change in our diets from, for instance, the 1970s, where nearly 90% of all the food we ate was what we would class to be sort of raw or home prepared fruits, vegetables,
Hmm.
nuts, seeds, home cooked meals from basic ingredients put together. And only around 10% of our diet in the 70s was made up of anything that you would class to be processed, and how since the 1970s that change has been absolutely vast in its swing the other way. Almost now 70% of all the food that we eat is what we would class to be ultra processed, manufactured in some way, consisting of more than five ingredients, and only now 10% of what most people are eating are actually comes from what we class to be as a raw food, as things that we self-construct,
Oh,
out of fruits and vegetables. And that to me
uh,
was
yeah.
utterly shocking. I mean, not from just an environmental point of view, but from the carbon footprint of what we're producing, and then obviously the plastic, but also just the
Yes.
monumental change in the culture surrounding the food that we eat. And I think we're now slowly but surely migrating back the other way.
Oh, I agree. And if I can make a suggestion, then think about something. And you're talking about the change of diets throughout the ages, and picking up on something that you said a while ago, a problem about problems around Christmas. If at one point you want to towards Christmas, we can do another podcast or something similar, talking about one pine tree allergy,
Oh, but
because
yeah,
a lot of people don't either.
Mark can't touch it. Can't touch the Christmas tree, which suits me.
But
I have to make the note. It suits me very well because the Christmas tree itself is very much my wheelhouse in the house. He's not allowed to touch them,
yeah.
but he's unable to because he's highly allergic to them.
but also something interesting that's very often I touch in my posts around Christmas time is the evolution of food, and how the evolution of food throughout decades has influenced allergic reactions around Christmas now. And if you go back to the time of the Romans and the festivities of Saturnalia, and what did they eat in Saturnalia? Because what they did around then is what we use nowadays for our festivities around Christmas time. And now the change in that diet from Saturnalia or from the Jorvik, from the northern countries, to the diet that was then, which was so healthy with a lot of nuts, as you mentioned, a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, to what it is now. And now that change has led also to the development of allergies, but also how agriculture or the influence of agriculture from that point until now has changed dramatically.
Do you think that the amount of allergies surrounding that is due to the sheer amount of hidden ingredients in the food that we're consuming?
Oh, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. Mainly because of one thing, and it is something that people are now becoming more aware of. It is called the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome, so that variability of viruses and bacteria and parasites that all of us have been decreasing through the ages because of all those hidden ingredients on the food, on processed food, is actually killing a lot of the gut microbiome. We are not ingesting as much good things into our gut as we should. So that idea, especially again for gardeners and farmers, that idea that kids let them play on the dirt and let it put things in their mouth because that is good for them, which it is really good for them. It came to a society in which we started using the 99.99% clean wipes, and then that biodiversity that we should have in our gut, which is associated also with a very good diet, has been completely destroyed.
Okay, so some really, really good points there. So the take home from today's conversation really is that a healthy gut is a healthy body, and if you
Oh,
eat well,
absolutely.
eat well, drink well, and sleep well, that you're going to help defend yourself from all your body from all sorts of attack, whether it's from allergies or
Oh,
otherwise, and
in,
to ex
indeed.
and to cautiously expose our young people as we would have done as children to small amounts of things and let them play and be dirty and consume small amounts of all sorts of different foods.
No, entirely. I entirely agree with you. And fortunately, it's not just simply my opinion. There's loads of research that has been published that's showing that that is the best way forward.
And wonderful. And you've educated me in several ways today, Dr. Costa. I'm really, really glad that we've had this conversation, especially
I'm
as we
very, more than
move
happy.
through into the gardening season. I mean, I obviously garden as a professional gardener. I garden all season long, but we are into that season now where people are opening up their patio doors. They're stepping out onto their patios, often for the first
Ye-
time, sort of like the Lion
Yeah,
King. They're blinking into the sun and heading out into their garden. They're putting on their shorts, which they haven't put on for a year, and all the white bits are exposed, and off they
yes.
go into the garden to light the barbecue and clean off the patio furniture. And then within about 15 minutes, they're all sneezing and got terribly streamy eyes, and in they go and close the door again. So there's some really helpful tips there. So
Absolutely.
your biggest advice to anybody suffering really badly with allergies and hay fever especially is I would assume it would be to find out exactly what is the trigger.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I entirely agree
identify
with
that
that.
and then treat it in the correct way that for whatever is best for that particular trigger.
Exactly, exactly. Because, and especially if you suffer terribly, there's particular ways for us to sort it out and for them not to suffer anymore.
Okay, because again, we all know that I say whether you have someone in your household or know someone within your family or friend group that suffers with it, because it can be really really bad. And I suppose I'm guilty of saying to Mark, I kind of grew out of it, and I don't understand why his are so bad. But he obviously has other lying underlying conditions, for instance, with his asthma
Mm,
that make them they compound it and make them much much worse for him.
yes, a combination of factors will make things worse.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, suffering, but also for all those gardeners that are suffering. Even as I'm walking with my son, sometimes I feel the smell of flowers around me. For them that are suffering so much and their nose is completely blocked, how will they smell the wonderful flowers that they might have in their gardens? They won't.
Well, that's something that's particularly important to me. I had COVID a couple of times during the pandemic, and it took quite a while for my sense receptors. I almost had to reset them. And
Yes.
luckily enough for me, we actually know someone who mixes perfumes as a hobby, and my nose is quite well trained anyway, which is obviously what I do. I review plants and describe their scent and fragrance, and
Uh-huh.
for quite some time it was quite difficult. I was really had to work very hard to retrain those receptors and retrain my brain to smell different notes and things. So yeah, that's quite important to me as well. So there's nothing.
Absolutely. And it must have been tricky for you to do all that, to retrain yourself and to be out of smell.
It was something I had to do quite quickly because there was quite a lot of pressure to do so. So I had to sort of get on with it. So
No, absolutely.
looking forward to smelling many roses over the next couple of months with an awful lot of work ahead of me. Dr.
Uh,
Costa, thank you so much for joining me on today's
Thank you
podcast.
for your invitation.
Has honestly been an absolute eye opener. And yeah, we shall continue this conversation at another time. But thank you very much for joining us today,
Absolutely. Thank you
and
so
thank you
much.
for your time. Thanks very much.
Have a
Now,
good day. Bye
good,
bye.
you too. Bye bye. Oh my goodness, that was an incredibly informative, interesting, and very stimulating conversation. And as I said just before the interview with Dr. Jose Costa, I've learnt more about airborne allergies and hay fever in one conversation than I have in decades talking to my personal GP. And Mark has done, going backwards and forwards trying to make himself feel better. There are several points that Dr. Jose Costa made during the conversation that Mark and I are going to investigate further in a bid to make himself feel better. So if you struggle with airborne allergies and hay fever and it stops you going outside and going about your day-to-day business during the summer months, please do head over to his Instagram page now and give him a follow, where there's loads of more information on the subject. Next week on the Gardener Ben podcast, we're winging our way all the way back across the Atlantic Sea and heading to Boston, where I'm getting to speak to the president and vice president, two sisters running the New England Rose Society. Now, I've spoken an awful lot over the podcast and on the internet about the amazing opportunity I had to visit the New England Rose Society back in November 2023. Mark and I happened to be heading off to the Boston area and heading up and down the Kankomankas Highway to do some leaf peeping in the autumn. It just happened to coincide with the fact the girls were leading an AGM at the time, and I was invited along to be a guest speaker. This will and always will be one of the highlights of my online career, and I really enjoyed meeting their wonderful, diverse and incredibly welcoming members. So catch my conversation with the New England Rose Society on next week's episode of the podcast. Until then, I hope you enjoy the coverage of the Chelsea Flower Show and enjoy your garden. Happy gardening.